My name is Erin Brockovich, and I host the Lifetime television series, Final Justice. What you are about to see is a story about a crime that is misunderstood and far too often deadly: stalking. Peggy Klinke was stalked relentlessly by an ex-boyfriend. If you haven't experienced it, it's very hard to imagine the terror of what it feels like.
It all began in the fall of '98. At the age of 28, my sister Peggy began preparing for medical school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She met and began dating a man named Patrick Kennedy. You know, in the beginning, it seemed like a very fine relationship to me. They were dating, doing dating things, going to movies, but I noticed a switch in Peggy's personality. I just knew something wasn't right with my sister, and I wasn't sure why. Peggy and Patrick's relationship lasted about 3 years altogether. In March of 2002, Peggy cut all ties with him. From the day she left him, he began stalking her. Calling her on her cell phone, begging her to come back, threatening her. He waited outside of her work. He waited outside of her gym, just watching her till it was a sort of a sign to let you know that I'm there and I'm watching her every move.
He wanted her back in his life, and until he did, you know, he was just gonna persist with it.
At one point, Peggy had called me in the afternoon and said, "You'll never believe this. Patrick jumped out of the bushes at work with a dozen roses and a wedding ring and asked me to marry him." And Peggy said, "I walked right by him, I got in my car and drove away." Peggy was very, very strong and very determined to shake this man from her life. And the more she ignored him, the angrier he got. Then he progressed to paperwork. He made a really nice 8.5 by 11 flyer with a photo of my sister on it, wrote all sorts of incredible obscenities about her and put her cell phone number on it and distributed it where she had her nails done, where she had her hair cut, where her gym was, where she worked.
She took the flyer to the police and showed them that, but there was nothing they can do. It was only a flyer.
But I think at that point, you know, we were still thinking that he was just playing a game. We didn't think it would escalate. And then he took greater steps because she wasn't reacting. That June, our family gathered in Orlando, Florida for my brother's wedding. Peggy brought a new man she had begun dating, Mark Sparks. Patrick knew that we would all be in Florida for this wedding. And he had flown to my mother's house in Poland, Ohio, and on her white garage doors with black spray paint, he sprayed "PK is a whore" on the doors. Patrick then returned to Albuquerque to set fire to Mark's house.
I noticed I had about 8 messages on my cell phone, and I knew something was wrong. So I listened to the messages. My neighbor, my mother, the police, the fire department were all calling and saying that my house was on fire. Right away, Peggy knew that Patrick had done this.
Peggy and Mark were going from hotel to hotel because they had nowhere to live because Mark's house was set on fire. We were at the point we didn't want Peggy to call us because we didn't know if he was trying to trace a phone call. We didn't want him to find out Peggy's whereabouts. Peggy, it seemed for a while, was just in hiding.
Everything that Patrick did to Peggy, Peggy went and reported it to the police. She was getting very, very, very agitated with them because nothing was being done to stop this man from harassing her. Patrick's behavior was escalating and Peggy got a restraining order. She went to the police and filed for stalking charges. The trial was delayed for several months. Nothing was being done.
It was extremely frustrating, and in a time where you're being hunted by somebody and you feel more victimized by going through the system to protect yourself, then what good is it?
And I remember Peggy coming home having a binder of probably 200-300 pages in it of just everything she had documented. Peggy did all the footwork. Peggy did everything. She did everything right, but nobody would help her. Why? I don't know the answer to that.
And at this point, Peggy asked the DA, "Will it take a bullet to my head for you to do something about this?"
With Patrick's behavior escalating, we just felt like, at least temporarily, let's get you out of here. Let's wait for this stalking trial to come up And by that time, we can determine whether it's safe for you to move back home.
Peggy soon left for Turlock, California to begin a new life. She did everything she could to leave no trace or trail to protect herself. 6 days before her stalking trial was to happen, Patrick found Peggy after months of searching.
So how did this happen? After paying a private investigator for information, Peggy's stalker drove to the Albuquerque airport, checked a handgun and a hunting rifle at the airline counter, and flew to San Jose, California. He retrieved his bag with his weapons, rented a car, and arrived at her neighborhood. He posed as a private investigator, approached a delivery driver who recognized her photo, and gave him her exact address.
He caught up with her on her way out of the house early Saturday morning. He duct taped her hands together, he choked her, and he beat her. He beat her so severely with his gun that her blonde hair turned bright red. Despite all of this, Peggy managed to break free and flee to a neighbor's apartment where she was able to call 911.
911 emergency. I have a stalker and he's here to kill me. He's already beat me up and taped me. He's in my house, 1410, number 118. Here's what he does. Who's there? Patrick Kennedy. He's beating me up with a gun. He's trying to break in now. Does he have a gun right now? He does. He already beat my head. If you don't get here, he's going to kill both of us. Okay, we're on the way, ma'am. Now. Are they on the way? They're on their way. Quickly, my head is sopping wet with blood. He gets in this house, he's going to kill us. Stay on the line with me, ma'am. I'm staying on the line. Oh my God. How close are they? They're on their way. Patrick, I'm the only one here. He ran. Please. Stop it. Female. Please stop it. I actually got to kill me. Is he, ma'am?
The SWAT team arrived. Peggy told them, if you open this door, he will kill me.
And the police officer said, let's not talk about that, Peggy. Let's talk about your family. And Peggy had said, tell my mother that I love her. And tell my sister who's pregnant to name the baby after me. And tell my niece, Abby, she will have a guardian angel. And those were Peggy's 3 last requests before she was killed.
I just remember punching a hole in one of my walls, and I just, I started crying, and I just said, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry to Peggy, because, at that point you just feel that I failed her, that the whole system failed her. You just feel powerless.
The doorbell rang. I saw 2 police officers. In that instant, I knew they didn't even have to come into the house because I knew what had happened. I said, just tell me, did Patrick Kennedy kill my sister? And what I was told that night was that he had found Peggy, he had shot her in the head with a gun, and then he had killed himself. I decided, you know what? Knowing Peggy's personality, Peggy would have been on a cell phone at my funeral trying to take action, trying to make something good come out of something so tragic.
We felt the same way, so we contacted retired Lieutenant Mark Wynn, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement and an expert in stalking and domestic violence.
This offender hit every high indicator on a lethality scale for a stalker. He stalked across county lines, across state lines. He did all the things that we teach police officers today to read in a case before a homicide, because we believe that if you can read those signs, you can stop a stalker and you can stop a murderer.
Investigating a stalking case is like putting the pieces of a puzzle together. Each piece is necessary. You have to take the time to carefully and patiently listen to the victim to find out everything that's happened. Now, the victim may be focused initially on a single incident like vandalism to her car or a threat to her family, but you have to get all the information, including the minor things, in order to assess if you have a course of conduct. You also have to remember that unlike most other crimes, stalking behavior is ongoing. It's important to continue to monitor your stalking case even after the arrest to see if the behavior is still happening. Of critical importance in all stalking cases is putting the incidents in context. Often the behavior of the stalker will seem benign or harmless to someone who doesn't know the stalker. For example, many stalkers send love letters or flowers to the victim. You have to talk to the victim and ascertain why that particular behavior is so frightening to her or him. The stalker may have told the victim that the day she's going to die would be the day that he would send her a dozen roses. Or the love letter left on her doorstep may be his way of letting her know that he found her in her new home, which she thought was a secret from him. Context is everything in stalking cases.
Your job as a police officer is to piece all these puzzles together, all these pieces of the puzzle together, so you can see a clear picture of the offender in front of you.
Once you've interviewed the victim and the suspect's been identified, try to corroborate the victim's version of events in any way possible. Did any neighbors or someone in the workplace see the suspect? Are there photos or videos of the behavior? Any answering machine tapes, voicemail, or email? These things are helpful, but you don't have to have them. You can still proceed. Conducting an interview with a suspect can be very important in stalking cases. Many stalkers don't believe that what they're doing is wrong or illegal. And one technique that sometimes works is to open the interview with the suspect by asking, "Tell me how what you're doing is being misunderstood." Many detectives and investigators have found that stalkers enjoy talking about their behavior. Consider all the tools available to you: search warrants, surveillance operations, trash pulls, phone taps, and other techniques that law enforcement has successfully used in narcotics and other investigations. These can all be extremely useful in your stalking case.
Now we know we've got an offender. This is easy. We know we have an offender who's after a particular victim. How easy could it get? All you have to do is to focus your investigation on the offender and the victim, and you catch the offender in the act of the stalking. It's not like it's someone who's going some unknown place to do some unknown crime. You know who they are. Stalkers have no boundaries. So we have all got to be on the same sheet of music. There's certainly more offenders than there are police officers, but I like to think that we're a heck of a lot smarter than they are. So we've got to communicate with one another. There's really no excuse why we can't talk across state and county lines, why we can't have mutual aid agreements between sheriffs and police from one county to one city to one state, because these offenders move through these different places. They travel. We know victims run from state to state in domestic violence cases and stalking cases. We've got to be prepared for this.
Stalkers seldom limit their criminal behavior to one specific jurisdiction. Therefore, law enforcement has to be ready with cooperative agreements and policies in place to enable them to effectively work together to investigate these cases. Since stalking behavior is often ongoing, it's important to establish how you're going to manage a stalking case over what may be weeks, months, or even years.
Every police department in this country should have a policy or protocol for their officers on dealing with stalking. Policy is our direction, it's our mission, it gives you an assignment.
A stalking is a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. Now that fear is very real. Therefore, safety planning is crucial. It's a process that ideally involves many people: the victim, law enforcement, an advocate, the prosecutor, the victim's friends and neighbors, and anyone else who can help the victim. The key here is to keep the victim safe and to hold the offender accountable.
Orders of protection or restraining orders often are looked at by the criminal justice system as a civil issue, something that's involved in a divorce or custody or visitation, when in fact orders of protection are sort of that tripwire. It signals to you in government, especially law enforcement, that something worse is about to happen, because an order is clear. It's a sanction by a court to an offender of what you will and what you won't do. When an offender thumbs their nose at the court, this is an indicator that you've got high lethality on your hands, that you can't ignore it. There's no margin for error, and arresting for violation of order of protection is part of your counter-stalking. We've got to send a message to stalking victims that they can trust us, that they can depend on us, that we will investigate thoroughly, that we will offer safety before and after the arrest, and we'll deal with any other concerns that they have. You cannot minimize these cases. This is the most dangerous thing you can do in law enforcement. It's tombstone mentality. You cannot take a case like this and say, well, maybe it'll get better, because that's exactly what the offender wants. Once we give over to minimization, the offender takes over with maximization. That's exactly the way they look at it. They're depending on everybody to treat it less than a crime, and we can't do that. The longer we spend with a case, the more we're really going to see what the victim's been trying to tell us all along. And if you walk around in the shoes of a victim for a moment. And that's the way to do it, is to see the total picture. Once you do that, then you don't minimize, then you treat it right, then you thoroughly investigate, then you track down, then you prosecute, then the law keeps its promise.
Susan Herman is the Executive Director of the National Center for Victims of Crime.
In the United States, 1 in 12 women will be stalked in their lifetime, and 1 in 45 men. Every year, 1.4 million women in America are stalked, and the vast majority are female stalking victims stalked by someone they knew. Stalking and murder often go together. Almost 1/3 of women who are killed each year are killed by an intimate partner. Of those, 76% had also been stalked by that intimate partner in the year prior to their murder. 76%. Stalking is serious, pervasive, and lethal.
Police officers are often the first people that victims turn to, and you make an enormous difference in their lives. If you believe them, if you listen to them, if you treat them respectfully and sensitively, it is the most important single intervention, the most important moment for most victims of crime. You can and you do make an important difference every day.
For more information about stalking, you can contact the Stalking Resource Center at the National Center for Victims of Crime at 202-467-8700, or log on to the Stalking Resource Center's website at www.ncvc.org.